time, the Vought company held a major role in fighter development. We'll see the lineage of some of their designs. In 1938, Vought began efforts to produce a fighter plane. The advanced, powerful F4U project became the outstanding Corsair I. This plane would thrust the company into the forefront of fighter production. The Charles Vought F4U Corsair I first flew on May 29, 1940. The Corsair, with its inverted gull-wing and powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, became one of the outstanding combat aircraft of the war. More than 5,000 Corsairs were produced in 1944 alone. As a replacement for the tough Grumman Hellcat on American aircraft carriers, it was the first U.S. fighter capable of exceeding 400 miles per hour. However, it wasn't until 1942 that the folding wing design was finally approved for use on carriers. A combat record in the Pacific shows the true worth of the plane. Only 189 F4Us were lost in destroying 2,140 Japanese aircraft, a loss ratio of over 11 to 1. In the early 1950s, Vought was still producing the F4U Corsairs, which were being used heavily in the Korean conflict. Corsairs were used mostly for ground support, but Corsair pilots shot down 12 enemy aircraft, including a MiG-15 jet. The last Corsair, the 12,571st, was delivered in February 1953. And the last operational carrier landing of an F4U Corsair was made on the USS Valley Forge in 1956. Unfortunately, by this time, new jet engines were making their mark, and the F4U's load capabilities were beginning to show. Vought's next venture with fighters came with the naval contract issued on December 29, 1944. It was for a straight-wing carrier interceptor, the XF-6U Pirate. By the time the Pirate was ready to go into production, the underpowered straight-wing 1944 design was obsolete, and its successor, the XF-7U-1 Cutlass, had been flying for more than a year. Only 30 aircraft were delivered, and these were used mainly for training. After World War II, a great influx of German aeronautical research data was gained by the US. Some work on tailless designs done by the Arado company offered great promise in high rate of climb and high top speed. The plane first flew in 1948, and the first F7U debuted in December 1951. The design showed the engineering daring of the time. It was short with no tail, twin rudders and 2 engines, unlike anything else in service at that time. Looking back with today's vantage point, the airframe reminds us of much more current concepts today. The Cutlass was the first U.S. combat aircraft to be designed from the start to use afterburners. The further redesigned F7U with different engines was the first naval aircraft designed for reheated turbojets, and also introduced power controls with artificial feel and an automatic stabilization system. All groundbreaking design events to the Vought. The Cutlass, unfortunately, again suffered from the problem of being underpowered, but this is probably more a reflection of the state of development in jet engines of the day, rather than the design of the airframe. Like many designs of the time, orders were in small numbers with short service lives. Production was cut back in 1954, and it was withdrawn from service in 1957. In May 1953, Vought Division of United Aircraft won the new day fighter contract over 7 other competitors. This new fighter, The F8U Crusader was rolled out in February 1955 and flew supersonic on its maiden flight on March 25. The Crusader would be the Navy's first 1,000-mile-an-hour fighter in service. At the time, supersonic flight was a little understood field, and Vaught's designers showed their unmistakably clear vision with the results of the new plane. The Vought engineers came up with many brilliant designs to meet the Navy's strict requirements, toughening an airframe for carrier duty, folding the wings and including a tailhook all incurred a weight penalty on any design. Then requiring a supersonic top speed would not usually equate with the low landing speed needs for a carrier-borne aircraft. All of these needs were to combine completely in the F8U Crusader. The best example of these features in the aircraft was the variable incidence wing, which addressed the landing problems experienced by the Cutlass. On takeoff and landing, the F8U's wing could be pivoted up 7 degrees, hinging on the rear wind spar and jacked out by a hydraulic actuator. The variable incidence scheme allowed the wing to assume a high angle of attack, reducing the approach and takeoff speed, while keeping the fuselage level and providing the pilot with good visibility. It also eliminated the need for the long nose gear assembly that had been one of the Cutlass's major weak points. In addition, the raised wing's center section acted like an air brake, reducing landing speed further. The airframe's concept was designed with the new area ruling scheme, in which transonic performance was improved by making sure all cross-sections of the airframe changed as gradually as possible. This provided minimum drag at and above the speed of sound. Many of the concepts proven on this aircraft are still standard on today's fighter planes. Today, the Crusader has a reputation that's hard to beat. Outstanding maneuverability, excellent performance, and a very powerful attack. The armament section contained 4 20mm cannons with 144 rounds per gun. Behind the guns, on each side of the aircraft, was a launch rail for a single Sidewinder anti-aircraft missile. The aircraft was also fitted with a retractable rocket pack in the belly that stored 32 70mm unguided folding fin rockets. Later versions were strongly enhanced for the strike level through target illumination radar and the addition of 2 removable underwing stores pylons for jettisonable Zuni rocket packs, all up to 5,000 pounds of unguided weight. Only half the fuselage was occupied by the large Pratt & Whitney J57 engine, and the airframe's design would allow for long, unrefueled flights. Another innovation was the rat-ram air turbine that could be extended from the right side of the fuselage, directly behind the cannon, for emergency electrical and hydraulic power. The RAT would prove very useful in practice, allowing many pilots to bring home aircraft that would have otherwise been lost. The basic airframe would appear in 18 production versions and hold many world records. Variants included reconnaissance, photographic, night fighter, and twin-seat trainer versions. Future astronaut John Glenn broke the transcontinental speed record for the 2,445-mile trip between New York and Los Angeles in a Crusader on July 16, 1957. Over their lifetime, 1,263 Crusaders were built. As a mark of their abilities, their redesigns ran for over 10 years, while most of their contemporaries were simply judged at the end of their service lives as obsolete. In the 1960s, several hundred F8Us were remanufactured to extend their service life. Up until 1986, US reserve units used them, and a small number were built for the French Navy. final flights of these French Crusaders occurred at the aircraft's retirement ceremonies in Brest, France, in the December of 1999. At Vought, during production of the Crusader, concepts were being brought up for its successor. In 1956, the Navy again called for submissions on an all-weather interception fighter. The company's entry was the F8U Crusader III. The Vought F8U Crusader III was on the cutting edge of aeronautic design of the late 1950s. Although the aircraft was designated F8U, it was essentially a completely new design and bore only a superficial resemblance to the earlier F8Us. Initially, 5 prototypes were ordered. The Crusader III had the same general configuration as that of the earlier Crusader and kept the variable incidence wing. However, the F8U was appreciably larger and more powerful. The fuselage was enlarged to accommodate a Pratt & Whitney J75 turbojet with a thrust almost 60% greater than the previous Crusaders. The lower chin intake was angled forward in order to accommodate its expected greater than Mach 2 performance. Perhaps the most distinctive feature was the use of a pair of large hinged ventral fins to enhance maneuverability, which were extended vertically downward when the aircraft is in flight. These fins were retracted to a horizontal position for landings and takeoffs. On July 25, 1955, the Navy authorized the construction of 2 F8U prototypes for its maiden flight on June 2, 1958. During flight testing, the F8U demonstrated speeds of Mach 2.2 and zoom climb altitude of nearly 90,000 feet. The Crusader III was never flown to its limits because of the windshield assembly, which was made of acrylic and could not take the high temperatures of the aircraft's upper envelope. It was thought that without the windshield limitations, it could have reached speeds as high as Mach 2.7 or 2.9 at 35,000 feet. During the flyouts, though, it was beaten by the inspiring McDonnell F4 Phantom. The Phantom was designed to a more encompassing set of guidelines, which included interception, reconnaissance, and ground attack roles. Unfortunately, at that time, the military need was seen to be for 2 crew members and 2 engines, not the stunning interception performance of the Crusader III. The Vought development contract was cancelled in December of 1958. The limiting windshield was being redesigned when the contract was cancelled. Had it been accepted for production, the F8U aircraft would have been the world's fastest jet aircraft in service, with a maximum speed perhaps approaching Mach 3. The aircraft was in every way exceptional, and it's a pity that no place could be found for it. The loss of the order was not only discouraging to the engineers, but a threat to the viability of Vought itself. The next Navy aircraft to be replaced was the lighter jet plane, the Douglas A-4 Skyhawk. The new requirements were issued in late 1963, and they were nearly double those of the Skyhawks. To speed delivery and reduce costs, all applications would have to be based on existing aircraft, minimizing their risks with current technologies. While the Navy was happy with the speed of their Skyhawks, they also realized that requiring more speed from the new plane would also mean a heavier, costlier plane. So there was no speed stipulation in the contract to be issued. What there were, though, were requirements in the cost of manufacture, maintenance, and operation. On February 11, 1964, Vought won, against strong competition, the contract to develop the subsonic A-7 Corsair II. Developed from the supersonic F-8, it was the first supersonic design adopted into a subsonic design. While the lineage from the F8U is unmistakable, the Corsair II was in fact a totally new plane. It retained very few concepts from its Crusader forebears. Even the outstanding variable instance wing was not used in this subsonic attack jet. The original A-7s were powered by the Pratt & Whitney TF30 turbofan. They were equipped with multi-mode radar, and the aeroplane armament was one 20mm N61 multi-barrel cannon, plus up to 15,000 pounds of mixed stores carried externally on 6 underwing stores pylons. The TF30 engine would give the plane a top speed of 578 miles per hour at sea level. Specifically in line with the Navy requirements for ease of maintenance, this engine only had 42 stats in the installation procedure, and this could be achieved by a well-trained crew in under 15 minutes. All of this was precisely fitted into a specifically built airframe for the Navy's light attack role. The A-7 first flew on September 27, 1965, 4 weeks ahead of schedule, and was adopted by the Air Force and Navy. Vought was once again making Navy planes at full speed. A-7 production eventually totaled more than 1,500, including exports, when completed in 1982. The initial carrier trials showed some limitations. During the catapult launch, steam from the catapult could be sucked into the engine intake, reducing the thrust provided by the TF30 engine. To overcome this, limitations were placed on the takeoff weights of the A9As until the power plants were upgraded. In spite of the engine limitations, the Corsair was needed for the Vietnam conflict. Later, the same squadron, VA-147, were also called to the waters of North Korea. This squadron would fly their Corsairs for almost 20 years, and they were only replaced by F-18 Hornets in 1985. These were, for their time, the best light attack aircraft ever produced. The armaments used on the A-7s during their life cover all facets of the U.S. Armory. For attacks on surface-to-air missile sites, Shrike missiles could be used. For structures, 500-pound bombs could be employed. With the ever-present danger of the enemy MiGs, sidewinders were always carried. Aside from a little plane's toughness, it was also known for the precise, accurate delivery of all its weapons. In April 1968, the American Marines received their first A-9Ds. These were the first U.S. Army subsonic fighters in 15 years. They were used not only in their attack role, but also in search and rescue missions. During the Vietnam conflict, one of these Corsairs stayed airborne for over 9 hours. The U.S. Navy was so impressed with the Army's A-7Ds that they ordered further upgrades in weapons sophistication and power plant. These were delivered as the A-7Es. The remarkable accuracy of these planes now became outstanding. The A-7E's missions in conflicts eventually totaled more than all of the previous models combined. However, their losses were significantly less. This was attributed to their ability to deliver pinpoint accuracy with their weapons and leave the hostile area. Unfortunately for Vought, very few other nations purchased the Corsairs. Only Greece and Portugal outfitted their air forces in small numbers of these outstanding planes. The Greeks with retrofitted A-7Es as A-7Hs, and Portugal with ex-US Navy A-7As. The last of 850 A-7s were retired from the Navy's inventory following participation in the 1991 Desert Storm combat operations. Grimly, the A-7 Corsair series was the last aircraft designed and produced by the company. During this period, the company had also developed many other weapon systems and helicopters in association with Sikorsky. It should be with pride that they look back on their fighter development years. Very few other companies have produced such excellent aircraft over such a period.